It's pretty incredible chapter. And what I'd like to do, share with you a little, I was at we have an annual workshop at the Sunset School. It's the Vision Workshop. And I got to be down there in Texas, even though it's a virtual workshop. I was virtually there. I was there. But anyway, it was really nice being able to be with my family down there, my cousin. You guys know one of the most influential men in my life passed away in October, and his wife now needs to sell the ranch, so we were getting some things done, and I got to get a lot of work done there, and then meet with my family of classmates, and that was a joy, incredible joy, and very encouraging. And so I want to tell you, I know I let you guys know if you wanted to. You can always go to Sunset's website and look at the keynote speakers. What they did was the keynotes were on, basically on the YouTube channel through their website, but the workshops were through this Zoom thing. And so anyway, you can go back and look it up. But here's the theme, in case you didn't know. It was using technology to preach the word. And so the opening, the president, Tim Burrow, gave the opening for the workshop and kind of introduced the idea, which is basically the whole thing, and speakers talked about all the different ways we can communicate now through technology. But the bottom line is, however we communicate, whatever resources that we find ourselves in, and for a lot of us, we don't like using this technology. And typically older people don't like to communicate with whatever the thing is. You know, a lot of people you see everywhere where my nephews are doing this all the time. They take pictures of themselves, then they send the picture to their friend, and then they chat about the picture they just sent. And this is how they spend their time, all right? Or they talk to each other, and I see people out all the time where they're talking to somebody, but they're seeing them. They're FaceTime or whatever it is. And so, but older folks, we're like, really? Can't we just talk? But here's what happens. See, I never liked computers. I worked in a business. I'm a construction worker by trade, and I didn't like using, computers. I was telling Claudia, I had a pager, before cell phones, and I hated the thing because it meant there's an emergency. And so you hear this tone, and you wake up at night, something's ringing in your head, and you think you're something buzzing around here. But here's what happens. You guys remember the storm, the Halloween storm we had, where we lost power for a week? And I remember back then that the phrase was, parents and grandparents got to meet their kids for the first time. Because they were off. A lot of them couldn't charge their phones or whatever. They had to, and you couldn't go out at night, and so, because the power was out, and so you got to spend time. This is an opportunity for us, even though we don't like sometimes the technology that's out there, but now we're kind of forced into it. I always say, like today, and I wore the coldest tie I could come up with because it's so chilly out. But we get a blast of cold like this, cold weather, and then it goes back up to 30, and we're like, wow, 30 is nice and warm. So we get acclimated. So take advantage of this time to experiment with the different technology. But here's the key. The key is relationships, is developing a relationship and ultimately getting with people. The body of Christ is designed to be a body, and a body needs to come together and function together. So these are aids, and we need to use these aids wisely. So I call this lions and tigers and bears because it's dangers and toils and snares. The lesson today is really from Matthew chapter 10, and I wanted to go back what was presented at the beginning of, hey, let's use the technology, let's contact people in creative ways. But the bottom line is preach the word, and that can never be sacrificed. And what that means is preach the word. Not what do I think this word means, or can I make this word say what I want it to say? Yeah, you can. In our Wednesday class, we pointed out, I brought the quote this week, and it's stunning, right, Irene? When you hear that quote, it's headlines. And you read these headlines and you think, wow, that was last week. No, that was over 150 years ago. And it's the same, you could put in the same thing, and it could be 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Everything, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But I say the word was given to us for our understanding. If we don't understand the context, who the word was written to and what was the purpose, then we could miss the application. And so that's the instruction is, and I know it's difficult. And I say this over and over again. One of the things as we're going through our Wednesday study in the book of Revelation, Elisa Ray, one of the problems that we have with the Revelation or apocalyptic language is what we already know gets in the way. We grew up in a time, even the younger generation now, grows up in a time mark where you're exposed to visual things that are just stunning, captivating. I mean, movies and technology that how you wonder sometimes, I don't know if you're like me and you watch some of these images and you're wondering, how could they produce something like that? And I would imagine it would be the same going back before radio and television, when people would look at an artist's rendering. And you know what they say about a picture, right? It's worth 1,000 words. But it distracts us. It can help us, but it also can distract us. So I wanted to pick up, I'm hoping I can put Matthew chapter 10 in its context so that we can get some value from it. And that's why, Linda, I put down lions, tigers, and bears, but really it's dangers, toils, and snares. Because we have a song we sing about that, dangers, toils, and snares. To help us, there are dangers and toils and snares. And they're all similar, but they have their differences. Bradley talked last week about this highway. He gave an example of hiking. And when you're hiking, it's great to have a path where the path is already marked out. You're on a trail, a little easier, and you can follow the way. It's pretty easy. And you don't worry about finding your way back because the trail is marked. And we talk about highways are like that. Highways are set in place, so it makes it easy for us to travel. We don't even have to think about it as long as we stay on the right road. But if there's a detour, if there's something that happens, an accident, and it causes us to get out of the way, now we've got to, regroup. And so I mentioned this morning in our class that the ones that have gone before us, we call them trailblazers. Trailblazers. And I remember starting out in our business, they said, oh, the leaders have already gone before you, and all you have to do is follow in their footsteps. Just follow in their footsteps. Why is it so difficult to do that? Because I want to go my way. I'm an individual and I like to do things my way. So let's bring us up to Matthew chapter 10. In Matthew chapter 10, Jesus is going to select his 12 apostles. According to Matthew's account, Matthew's going to put this narrative in a way where he's going to present to us Jesus picking out the 12 apostles, and then he's going to send them out on this task. But to bring us up to there, it's in the context of Matthew's gospel, and Matthew presents Jesus in chapter 1 as the son of David, the son of Abraham. He's David's offspring. He's born of a Virgin Mary. Why does Matthew say that? Because Matthew is presenting Jesus is the one the prophets had spoke about. and foretold. This is the Jesus. Now again, we're going through the book of Acts as our history lesson, our heritage. But Acts, like all the New Testament writings, they were written. I said this to my classmates, and one of the wives said, "What do you mean?" Because I used the word codify. I've been using that word a lot around here. The New Testament writings were sent out by the apostles. They were telling the good news, the gospel, as we're going to see how Jesus sent them out here in Matthew chapter 10. But the apostles went out, and then they were telling their experiences with Jesus, and they were communicating all that Jesus had taught them. Jesus, told them in Matthew 28, 18 through 20, that all authority is given to me. Now you go out, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, teaching them everything that I've commanded you. And so they were to go out and do the same thing. And so Matthew is telling us who Jesus is as his gospel. But he's writing it, probably all the writings of the New Testament, if you can kind of picture this in your mind, they were told and retold for about 20 years before it was written down. All the writings of the New Testament started to come together between 30 and 40 years after Jesus' ascension. But prior to that, they were just telling and retelling and debating and confronting people that would try to twist in Acts chapter 8 and now Acts chapter 13. In Acts chapter 8, there was Simon the sorcerer who was trying to pervert the word. And then Elymas the magician in Acts chapter 13. He was taking what Paul was saying and he was twisting it. But they're not the only ones. When Paul was going out, as we're going to see through Acts, as Paul's going out, he's starting churches. And then as he goes back, he appoints elders. And he sets up this pattern of developing people into a church, into a community of believers, and then appointing elders to them. By the time we get to Acts chapter 20, he's going to be praying with the Ephesian elders, and he's going to say, some of these elders may be wolves. In the New Testament writers, by the time we get to the epistles, they're telling us, test the spirits. Test those who say they're apostles and they're not. We got to the first letter in the Revelation of Jesus to the church at Ephesus, and Jesus is telling them, I have this I have for you. You hate those who are false. You tested them. Jesus expects us to understand. Jesus doesn't promise us that if we're just faithful, we can live in peaceful, ignorant bliss. I teach my students all the time, here and abroad. You want to know when life gets easier? When you finally accept that life is hard. Because until you accept that life is hard, you just can't get over it. Why is this happening to me? The Habakkuk is crying out, God, why are you punishing righteous people and letting the wicked prosper? Until you find out. We live in a world where people are slaves. And when you're slaves to sin, you're easily shamed and manipulated by others. Jesus came to free us from the slavery of sin. He says if you confess your sin, then you can be free of it. But when you hide it and you conceal it, it will enslave you. So Jesus is presented in Matthew's narrative as he's the Savior, he's the chosen one, he's the one that the prophets had foretold. And then we see John the Baptist as the forerunner, and then Jesus comes and he's baptized by John the Baptist, and then immediately he's out in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights, and he's tempted by the tempter, and he reveals to us that he knows the word better than the deceiver. There's a good lesson for us in that. The deceiver says, hey, it's written. And Jesus says, hey, I know what's written. Do you? Matthew 5, 6, and 7 is what we call the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus now speaks to the people with authority that they're not used to. They say he speaks with this authority. Where does he get this authority? Well, it's recognized because by the time you get to chapter 8, after Jesus gives this lesson, he goes out and he heals a leper, and then this centurion comes up to him and he says, hey, I have a servant that needs healing. And Jesus said, well, take me to him. And he says, no, all you have to do is just say the word. He says, I'm under commander. I give orders. When I say go, they go. And Jesus said, wow, I haven't found faith like this in all of Israel. And he says he healed the manservant in that very moment. He heals many. In Matthew 8:22, Jesus said, follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead. It's stunning to me that if, I always, that verse bothered me. Well, Jesus, I have to bury my dead, my loved one. And it really is stunning to me that when Jesus, at the time of his ministry, he expected people to follow him. He's God in the flesh. He performed the signs so that they would recognize him. If they're not following him, they're dead, and there's no hope. He calms the storm, and his disciples say, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. He heals the demon-possessed man, heals a paralytic. In chapter 9, he calls Matthew, and then he's at Matthew's house, and they're questioning him. I like this in Matthew 9. He says, he uses this term about himself. 9:15, and Jesus said to them, can the wedding guest mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? Do you ever wonder why he would say such a thing? And nobody seems to question him about that. Alan, do you ever wonder why? I know you do, because we talk about it. Why the heck Jesus say, why the bridegroom is with them? Jesus isn't getting married, is he? Stunning. Raises a girl from the dead. Heals blind men. Makes a mute man speak. At the end of chapter 9, it says in verse 35, and Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, look, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers the laborers are few. Verse 38, the last verse of chapter 9 in Matthew says, therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. Okay, into his harvest. And that leads us into, so that's the backdrop to chapter 10. Right away in chapter 10, Matthew says Jesus picks his 12 apostles. All right? He called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority. And watch this. This is 10:1. Over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. He gives them power. And then he names them, the 12. And then he says in verse 5, these 12 Jesus sent out instructing them, go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans. Why? You say, why? Because we know, and looking back, there's a judgment coming on the Jews. There's a judgment coming on Israel. Because Israel was God's people who were supposed to recognize him. If they don't recognize him, it's going to be worse for them And Jesus says this over and over again, than Sodom and Gomorrah. But he says in verse 6, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Verse 7, and proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Now watch this. Verse 8. Look at verse 8. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You receive without paying, give without pay. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, and cast out demons. Why is Jesus telling them to do this? These are the miracles that Israel was supposed to recognize. Who can do this? Alice, what does it mean, right? What is going on? But he says in verse 9, acquire no gold nor silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, nor 2 tunics, nor sandals, nor staff, for the laborer deserves his food. And whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy in it, and stay there until you depart. Titus, hear me on this, okay? Because you're a young man. Yeah, you're a young man. As I look around here. Find those who are worthy. This journey is not going to be easy, but there's a way to find out who are worthy and partner with them. As you enter a house, greet it. If the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it, but if it is not, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave that house or town. Verse 15, truly I say, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. Now, this is our verse today, verse 16. Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpent and as innocent as doves. Where is he sending them? He's sending them to the house of Israel. And he says, behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Stunning. Why? Because they're supposed to recognize God's power. And when they see it and they deny it, what else is left? What's going to get your attention? Have you hardened your heart so much that you cannot see what's before you? And this is why I said, as we're going through our study in Acts, the language, watch the language. In Acts 13:31 today, we notice another verse where Paul identifies who the witnesses are and what their commission is. These are the witnesses, these 12 apostles. They're given this authority and they're commanded at this point to go to the house of Israel and to perform these miracles so that they would understand where your power comes from. Did they not know that they were sent by Jesus? You know, by the way, when you go back to chapter 9 where Jesus goes to the centurion, or maybe chapter 8, I think it was chapter 8. When Jesus goes and he's confronted by the centurion, this is a Roman official, and he says, Jesus is Lord. And then I'm not worthy to have you in my house. I brought the question up this morning about the God-fearers being in the synagogue. What are they doing there? It's interesting. Just interesting at this point. Jesus is going to tell them now, from verse 16, what Bradley read. Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpent and innocent as doves. Titus, this is why I say what we want to do is identify who we're dealing with in the world. And we're on a journey. We're in the way, as Bradley said. We're on the path. But we want to stay on the path. There are dangers along the way. Dangers. Things that, where's the danger? Like Bradley said, when you get off the path. Right? I got to take a detour. And what happened? I don't know. I was on the path. It was going pretty good, but I got distracted. Now I'm off the path. There's dangers in there. And then I get scared and I'm worried and I panic because I'm not sure. I don't have a sure footing anymore. But there's also toils. What are the toils? The toils is work. You got to work. And he says in verse 17, beware of men, for they will deliver you over to the courts and flog you in their synagogues. You will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. That's their purpose. Their purpose is to stay faithful to the end, to be Jesus' witnesses. Jesus is going to comfort them in the midst of this danger and toil that they're about to go through. Verse 19, when they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given you in that hour. You are my witnesses. I'm giving you power. Do what I tell you to do. Stay on the path, but you're going to be assailed because there's snares out there. And when they assail you, don't worry. I'm going to give you what to say. Just stay faithful to me. He said, did I not choose you wisely? Except Judas Iscariot. So, verse 21, brother will deliver brother over to death, and father his child, and children will rise up against their parents and have them put to death. Oh, can you imagine? And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. Could we bear up under that? As I said, the context here is Jesus is sending out his apostles. These apostles have miraculous power, but their miraculous power is not used to save them from the dangers, toils, and snares. It was to be their witness to the others, to pay attention, ask, what does it mean? When they persecute you, verse 23, in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher, and the servant like his master. If they called the master of the house of Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of his household? So he's saying, they're saying I'm doing this by the prince of darkness. And he says, no, Jesus is the light that came into the world. Verse 26, so he says, have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light. Why is he telling him, Keyshawn, in the dark? Because he's not in his glory yet. He hasn't been glorified yet. But he says, what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. You're going to go out and shout. You see what they did to me? Now, when you go out and make a noise, they're coming after you. But he says in verse 28, do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. These are the pioneers that, like so many times, we have church fathers, forefathers, forerunners. Why are they our fathers? Why are they revered? Because they took all the arrows. We say, right? We know that, right? The pioneers were the ones that went through the wilderness when there was no protection. And they were picked off. They say they got all the arrows. I know we watch the cartoons and it's funny, but the little kid, he's imagining in class when he should be doing his work. And he's like, dun, 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 he gets on the horse and he goes and he's got to deliver the mail and he's got to ride through. He leaves the fort and he goes out in the wilderness and he comes back and he's filled with arrows. He's like a pincushion. It's funny. Dangers, toils, and snares, right? They're forerunners. They took all the arrows. What's the application? They went before us. What could we possibly do that they hadn't done already? And Keyshawn read this morning for us that fix your eye on Jesus. This sin that so easily entangles us. So I say, it makes us a slave. But if we will confess it, if we will confess our sin, and we will make a choice that we are not going to participate in the world, then if we'll be renewed by the Word and be regenerated, He'll give us the power to overcome the circumstances in our lives. But we can't have fear. We got to know with whom we've trusted. Are 2 sparrows sold for a penny, and not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father? But even the hairs on your head are all numbered. I always think of Tommy Washington. He always said that, right? He prayed that a lot too. God numbers the hair. He knows. If you think of, there's 7+ billion people on the planet, and God knows every hair on their head. I know, some of them are easier to count than others. But you still have them, right? Even whether they show or not. Okay? And your whole head, right? So it's the whole head. But amazing. We can't comprehend that. Verse 31, fear not, therefore, are you not more valuable than many sparrows? So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven. And then he closes out with this. He says, do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. Wait a second, I thought peace and goodwill to man. Jesus didn't come to bring peace. Jesus is our peace. You got it? He didn't come to bring peace. He is our peace. And if we'll get right with him, we can have fellowship in his bride. He's the bridegroom. His bride is holy. You want to be holy and blameless? Get a hold of this. Verse 35, I've come to set man against his father, and daughter against her mother, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. We always think the enemy is somewhere else. Woe is me. The world is against me. Yeah. Get that down. Accept it. And then it gets easy. Verse 37, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And then there's rewards. So, dangers, toils, and snares. Along the way, there are those that will distract, discourage, try to get us off the path. What's the way that we can stay on the path? And I love the prayer. And Paul prayed it this morning, again, that we have this word, that Jesus said, feed on it. Eat my flesh and drink my blood. John 6 through 8. John chapter 6 through 8. Jesus goes through this whole litany of, it's not the flesh, it's the Spirit. If you want to have this joy, the joy that's set before us. You know, just like the dangers, toils, and snares, the trouble begets trouble. Didn't your folks tell you that? Don't hang around with trouble, Mark. Trouble begets trouble. All you're going to do is get in trouble. But righteousness begets righteousness. And Jesus talks about the reward. Whoever receives me and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. The one who receives a prophet because he is a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. The one who receives a righteous person because he's a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones even a cup of cold water because he is a disciple, truly I say to you, he will be by no means lose his reward. There's a great reward. What we need to understand is sin separates us from our God. Sin separates us. And Jesus is our peace. Jesus reconciles us. He brings us back into a right relationship with God. But we have to stay in the light. We have to learn from him. He says, take my yoke, right? My yoke is easy. My burden is light. Well, how can you say that? 11:29, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Why? Because sin is slavery. And your soul will always be tormented when you're a slave to sin. you have to make a choice. And it's not easy, and it's not even, at times, seemingly within our power. The answer, by the way, is not to stop sinning. The answer is not to stop sinning. The answer is to be transformed into the likeness of Jesus, so sin no longer has any allure to you. How about that? How about if we get to the point where sin can't entice us anymore because our love of God is so great? And that's what the church is for. That's what the holy bride of Jesus is for, is to help us be transformed, to build one another up in the songs that we sing, in the words that we tell one another, in our study together. Our study, Alan said, oh, I forgot what he said. He didn't say awesome. He didn't use the word awesome. What did you say? Oh, I had it, now I forgot it. We were together the other night. It's awesome. It's when we come together and we build each other up. We need to reach out, use technology, yes, but what we really need to do is we need to preach the word. Jesus in the Revelation presents himself like Peter. He says, you are a kingdom of priests. You're a kingdom of priests. The Hebrew writer says, and though you ought to be teachers by now, you need someone to teach you. You know, if you're in a situation where you're locked down and shut in, and I can't imagine this, but if you're bored, try reading some of the word. And if it's difficult, then try to find somebody in the way who can help you on the journey. What a joy that is. But be wise. Be wise. The same people that are in the way, that can help you in the way, can turn and devour you. I love the Pilgrim's Progress. I love the imagery in that. I love reading it in the Old English too, the Pilgrim's Progress. Because at times, and it's interesting, I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie The Days of Wine and Roses. Jack Lemmon won an award for that one. But it's about alcoholism, right? And he's caught in alcoholism. But you think the whole movie is about Jack Lemmon's character, this alcoholic. Turns out it wasn't about Jack. It wasn't about the man and his alcoholism. It was about his wife. In the end, he turns around and he cleans himself up, but he can't reach his wife. He brought his wife down. In the Pilgrim's Progress, the ones who are going with Christian, at times they separate because you have to make a choice. We saw Paul and Barnabas had a sharp disagreement because of John Mark. Paul didn't want him because he left them. He abandoned them. But they got back together. I like in the Pilgrim's Progress that they reunite. It's a kind of a happy ending. But at times people can help you, and you got to go along with it. And other times they'll let you down, but trust in him who leads you all the way. Okay? Let's build each other up. Let's find a way to reach out and use this technology, but let's be faithful to the word and follow the trailblazers. I love that imagery. If you're separated by sin, and sin has caught you in slavery, reach out. You need to get out of that. You need to know how to confess that, how to pray to God, and how to get on the path of righteousness so that the transformation can overcome the power of sin. That's the only way. So if you have a need, we have an invitation sign. So you come up while we sing.